Hi everyone. Today we are going over the readings from Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. We're reading Existentialism is a Humanism and the Myth of Sisyphus. And let me say a little bit, close this window again. Let me say a little bit of general introduction here. So we're following up from Descartes, and in both the Sartre and the Camus, we see direct parallels to Descartes, direct relation to Cartesian philosophy. And in general, Sartre and Camus represent sort of the other whole in a dichotomy that I'm trying to set up here. Sartre is famous as the sort of most famous existentialist philosopher, and Camus is often grouped together with Sartre as a famous existentialist. Right? French existentialism is a very trendy and for in the 20th century extremely influential sort of version of philosophy, brand of philosophy. Now, what existentialism is, sort of the limits of what we call existentialism, it's pretty murky. And even Camus, who we consider, sort of popularly considered one of the central figures of French existentialism, even Camus didn't consider himself an existentialist. But existentialism, such as it is, begins in the 19th century as a kind of reaction against or critique of the rationalism, the positivism, the scientism that begins with Descartes and modern philosophy. So sometimes the first figure in the history of existentialism is considered a Danish philosopher named Søren Kierkegaard. And in the Myth of Sisyphus, Camus devotes some significant time to a discussion of Kierkegaard. The other major sort of precursor to this French existentialism, there's two, would be Friedrich Nietzsche, 19th century German philosopher, and then a 20th century German philosopher, Martin Heidegger. And these are the sort of three major philosophers that are influencing Sartre and Camus. We're not going to read them. We're going to read the Sartre and Camus as a kind of more accessible, to the extent that they're accessible, more accessible way into these existential ideas. So let's jump into the Sartre essay, because I think in this essay he lays out fairly clearly how his existentialism is a one antipode of, or the kind of opposite of the Cartesian philosophy, even though it's also stemming out of Cartesian philosophy. So we see this interesting inheritance from Descartes, where the way that Descartes has been used and interpreted is rejected, but the core insight of Descartes is picked up and revitalized. So Sartre is, as I said, French, a key figure in 20th century French philosophy, central figure of French existentialism. His dates are 1905 to 1980. And in this essay that we're reading, Existentialism is a Humanism, Sartre wants to push back against critiques of existentialism, various criticisms that have been leveled against existentialism since he started writing. And so there are several sort of key critiques. That isn't the heart of what we're going to talk about today, but it is, I think, worth mentioning. Right, so the primary critiques he wants to bring up are the critiques of coming from the Catholics and those from the communists. Now, Sartre is obviously born in 1905, writing primarily in the first half of the 20th century, and being French, he lived through the invasion of Paris, the invasion of France, the occupation of France by the Nazis, and he is celebrated as a major figure in the French resistance, resistance to the Vichy regime, the Nazi collaborating regime in France in the 1930s and 40s. Now, this is just to give some context to who Sartre is responding to. Right? And Sartre is in this sort of first half of the 20th century. He's thinking about fascism. He's thinking about communism. He's thinking about democracy, capitalism. He's thinking about how to situate yourself politically. And the communists were a very powerful party in France at the time. Not the most powerful, obviously. They had never been the most powerful in France. But in resisting the Nazis, Sartre is in dialogue with the communists. He is sympathetic to a lot of communist ideas. So he wants to respond to communist critiques to explain how existentialism positions itself with respect to communism. And he wants to respond to critiques from more traditional avenues in French culture, France being predominantly Catholic. He wants to respond essentially to the old guard traditionalist Catholics who say that existentialism is sort of immoral, destroying the moral code of France, and is sort of inherently without values, and this will end up being true for Sartre. Now, all right, let's jump into it. But I'll read from page 1 a little bit about this. These critiques. Right? So, from another quarter, he says, "We are reproached for having underlined all that is ignominious in the human situation." Underlined all that is ignominious in the situation. Right? So existentialism dwells on what is ignominious, what is unnoble, what is ugly and evil about humanity. Right? That existentialism takes up, is concerned with the unpretty parts of being human. Right? And for this reason, it is sort of dismissed or rejected as devilish or evil from the Catholic quarters, these other quarters that he's mentioning now. Right? So is reproached for depicting what is mean, sordid, or base, to the neglect of certain things that possess charm and beauty and belong to the brighter side of human nature. For example, according to the Catholic critic, Mademoiselle Mercier, we forget how an infant smiles. Right? So existentialism is charged with not talking about what's good about life, but instead highlighting and dwelling on what's bad about life. Right? Why can't you talk about the positive? Why can't you be positive? And this is one of the critiques of existentialism. Why are you always talking about the negative sides of life? So he goes on page 1. Both from this side from the Catholic side, and from the other, the communist side, we're also reproached for leaving out of account the solidarity of mankind and considering him in isolation. So both Catholics and communists are going to reproach existentialism for focusing on the individual, for understanding the individual as this isolated being, right? And in this isolation of the individual, existentialism undermines the possibility for solidarity. This is the critique of the communists and the Catholics. He goes on, and this, say the communists, is because we base our doctrine upon pure subjectivity, upon the Cartesian I think, right, which is the moment in which solitary man attains to himself. So Sartre is saying, right, existentialism is based on this Cartesian I think, the cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, right? Existentialism is in the position it is. It takes this position, a position that's being critiqued as sort of solipsistic and isolated, individualistic by communists and Catholics alike. It takes this position because it begins in the same place that Descartes begins, right? It accepts as a premise this Cartesian foundation of philosophy, right? The I think, therefore I am is the beginning of existentialism, just as it's the beginning of Descartes' philosophy. So as I indicated earlier, existentialism and Sartre are going to develop this Cartesian philosophy in a very different way than Descartes himself does. But it takes this Cartesian, I think, therefore I am, as its starting point. Right? They begin in the same place. He says, this is the moment in which solitary man attains to himself. Right? Why does existentialism embrace Cartesianism? Well, we'll see this more as we go through the essay, but in general, it is because Cartesianism, Descartes' philosophy, is an accurate, according to Sartre, description of how we come into contact with ourselves, right? How we are revealed to ourselves as the site of truth, the site of meaning. The place where truth and meaning first appear to us is within ourselves, right? In this solitary remove as individuals. And so this is why Sartre is going to begin with the same place as Descartes, because existentialism is going to be, above all, about being in touch with yourself as an individual, right? Who am I? How do I, as he puts it here, attain to myself? How do I strive to be myself? How do I become myself? And he says, according to communists and Catholics, this is a position from which it is impossible to regain solidarity with other men who exist outside of the self. The ego cannot reach them through the cogito. Right? So the critique is the critique that I made of Descartes also, right? That this focus on the self, the focus on the self as a thinking thing that discovers meaning and truth in solitude, makes other people less real, more trivial, less essential to my pursuit of truth and meaning, right? For communists and for Catholics also, truth and meaning are found not through individual solitude and reflection, but rather through communal activity, communal engagement, through solidarity. Now, the other main critique of existentialism that we're going to that Sartre deals with, that comes from both Catholics and communists, is that this existentialism is wholly subjective, right? Something that Sartre admits and embraces. Existentialism is a subjectivist philosophy, And this subjectivism is problematic for Catholics and communists because for both Catholics and communists, there is some specific truth, some specific plan or project that is objectively best, right? That is the correct thing to do, whether that is to follow the teachings of the Bible or to pursue class consciousness and the leveling of class distinctions. Both of those goals are viewed as objective, necessary, and inherently just and good. Right? They argue for, if not an objective idea of the good, an absolute idea, an inherently good project or plan. Right? Existentialism is going to be subjectivist because it's going to assert that the good is not absolute or objective. It doesn't lie inherently in any particular plan or project or idea, but the good and justice instead are discovered within the self, projected by the self onto the world, and in this sense are subjective in the sense that they come from the human subject. They come from our minds, from our souls, if you like, from our own values, our thinking and experience. They don't lie in the world itself. So let's just say a little bit more about this subjectivism generally, because this is really the key, I think, to understanding how existentialism is Cartesian. Descartes is generally considered to be an objectivist, and he is an objectivist. He's interested in objective scientific truth, right? And truth for Descartes only counts as truth if it is objective, which is to say clear and distinct. But to say a little bit more about what clear and distinct ends up meaning for Descartes, truth is that which I can know with a kind of mathematical certainty. Right? Scientific thinking attains to the degree of certainty that we find in mathematics. And so when I am using my reason to make judgments about the external world, those judgments will only count as certain and true, only be valid for Descartes if they have this kind of scientific mathematical certainty. Now, what kinds of things can I have that degree of certainty about? It will end up being, and Descartes says this explicitly, less so in Discourse on Method than in Meditations on First Philosophy. He says explicitly that my knowledge about the external world will primarily be about the external world as a mathematical set of objects, a set of mathematical objects. Right? I understand the world as a mathematical being, as a being that can be measured, right? A being that to which logic can be applied. Right? That part of the world which cannot be measured, which does not submit itself to logical reasoning, about that part of the world we cannot have knowledge. There is no truth in that region of experience, no truth in the sense that Descartes thinks of truth. Right? So for Descartes, the goal of using reason is to discover objective truths about the world, to make the world understood and known as a scientific object. But by making this very narrow definition of truth, where he says, truth is only found in these judgments about the the scientific object that is the world. Right? Truth is only won through scientific investigation. Right? By having this sort of narrow definition of truth, what Descartes does is, in essence, open up the entirety of human experience to subjective interpretation. Because I can never have a scientific grasp on the meaning of the good, because I can never measure justice, because I can never measure or scientifically examine what is valuable, right? Or what love is, or joy is, or for that matter, what despair and misery are. I can't measure pleasure and pain. I can't measure happiness and sadness. I can't observe them. There's nothing objective about them. So by giving this very narrow definition of what can count as objective truth, Descartes says, or implies, all of these other ideas about the good, about justice, about beauty, about anything that is a value, about that I can have no objective knowledge. I can only have subjective knowledge. There is no good in itself, in the sense that, if we think back to our Descartes, right, this is an explicit part of his project to explain how it can be that different cultures and different people value different things, right? That there is no value that is valuable in itself. All of that is cultural, is historically determined, is, right, to use Sartre's word, subjective. So Descartes, by delineating the realm of the scientific, the realm of certain truth, by saying what we cannot have certain truth about, Descartes delivers the whole realm of sort of human experience and human value to subjectivism. And this is where Sartre picks up Cartesian philosophy to say Descartes is right? There can be no objective and certain idea of the good. The Catholics, communists, they have faith, you might say. They assume, or they've decided that a classless society, or the teachings of the Bible are the proper plan or project, the proper goal. They are the good in themselves. But for Sartre, these are ultimately values that are arrived at subjectively. Right? Classless society is not good in itself, just as the teachings of the Bible are not good in themselves. They're good because they are valued by people, because some thinking subject has attributed value to them, because they mean something to someone. They aren't good in themselves. Their goodness can't be measured or observed. The justice that they claim to have cannot be scientifically known, right? And therefore, they cannot have the nature that communists and Catholics think they do, which is to be objective. Now, this, we'll think about this for the rest of the semester, what to make of this idea. But this is Sartre's position. And he says the nature of existentialism and these critiques of existentialism are slightly confused because there are two different kinds of existentialism. We're still on page 2 here. says the question is only complicated because there are two kinds of existentialists. There are, on the one hand, the Christians, among whom I shall name Karl Jaspers, and Gabriel Marcel, both professed Catholics. And on the other, the existential atheists, among whom we must place Heidegger, as well as the French existentialists and myself. What they have in common is simply the fact that they believe that existence comes before essence, or if you will, we must begin from the subjective. What exactly do we mean by that? Now, so Sartre is pointing out here that there are two different sort of camps within existentialism. There are the Catholic existentialists and the atheistic existentialists. So Kierkegaard, one of the sort of forefathers of existentialism, was a Catholic existentialist, or not Catholic, but Christian. And Sartre, here he's saying Heidegger, sure, we'll say Nietzsche, Heidegger, and Sartre are atheists. Now, let me say a little bit about atheism, and then we'll get into this question of what unites existentialism. How do the Christian existentialists and atheist existentialists, what unites them? But so atheism here is important to Sartre, right? He is interested in defending the atheist position, and he's arguing sort of aggressively for atheism. Now, I think it's important to think about the context here. This is first half of the 20th century. The Catholic Church is extremely powerful in France, declining in power, declining in influence, as Sartre notes, but still very powerful, right? It is perhaps not quite yet true that in France the pews in the cathedrals are empty. People are still going to church, right? It wouldn't be until after the Second World War that the decline in church attendance and religiosity really begins, or sort of picks up, becomes sort of the dominant cultural theme. Now, I personally find contemporary atheism to be something like adding insult to injury, in the sense that atheism has already been adopted by mainstream culture in the United States, at least, that the sort of cultural default is at least agnostic, right? Let's say agnostic rather than atheist. Atheism is the belief that there is no God. Agnosticism is the inability or unwillingness to make a determination about God. Now, right, so agnosticism means I don't know. So if contemporary atheism has something a little mean-spirited about it, it seems to me, this earlier version of atheism, this first half of the 20th century version that we're getting in Sartre, is, I think, engaged in a cultural battle that has a little bit more traction. Sartre is, with atheism, fighting I mean, certainly the idea of God and the kind of worldview that comes from Catholicism. But, well, let me say that, right, that I would say that Sartre's real adversary in his atheism is not per se the idea of God, but rather the worldview of Christianity. And this is something that he is going to take from Nietzsche. And we don't have time to get into Nietzsche as much as we should. We're just sort of overviewing these ideas. But Nietzsche is the one who, Friedrich Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900, is sort of the progenitor of this existentialist atheism. Nietzsche is the one who proclaims the death of God, right? That God is dead. He does this in the 1880s. Now, Nietzsche's real enemy, the real motivation for Nietzsche to declare the death of God, is not necessarily, is not because he wants to sort of mock religiosity or mock belief in God. For Nietzsche, God is a kind of stand-in for traditional metaphysics. God is the idea that organizes traditional culture. And it's the traditional culture that Nietzsche, above all, wants to destroy, to undermine. And I think Sartre is on the same page as Nietzsche here. A little less, I'd say, complex, a little bit sort of middle brow in his atheism, in the sense that if Nietzsche saw himself as taking on 2,000 years of thinking, 2,000 years of cultural inheritance, and as trying to overturn not just Christian theology, but the entirety of Western metaphysics and Western philosophy, in a more profound way than Descartes did, even. If Nietzsche sees himself as operating on that scale, Sartre sees himself operating in a smaller sphere. He's, it seems to me, more concerned with 20th century French culture, 19th and 20th century French society and tradition. And so rather than seeing God as this sort of, 2,000 plus year old philosophical idea and ground of philosophical thinking, he sees God and more as a kind of article of cultural tradition, as sort of a social phenomenon. Now, that's a little bit off topic, but we'll see how Sartre's atheism works. But what concerns him right now is what unites the Christian existentialists and the atheist existentialists. And what unites them, what all existentialists have in common, thus what makes existentialism, is, as he says here, they believe that existence comes before essence. Right? Or, if you will, that we must begin from the subjective. Again, this is on page 2. So let's focus on this first articulation of this, right? That existence precedes essence. Now, this is really, as Sartre just said, the, for lack of a better word, essential idea, the essentializing idea of existentialism. And as Sartre explains over the next couple pages, right? This is intended to be a reversal of all philosophy prior to Sartre, prior to existentialism. I think this is Sartre giving an interpretation of Nietzsche, This is Sartre's interpretation of Nietzsche. Whether we think this is a good interpretation or not is sort of immaterial at the moment. But in this idea, existence precedes essence, we can get the kind of flavor of that grander Nietzschean critique of Western philosophy. So let's read a little bit. What do we mean? This is on page 3. What do we mean by saying that existence precedes essence? We mean that man, first of all, exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterward. Now, this is good language here. I want to highlight this word surges up, or this phrase surges up in the world. What do we mean by saying that existence precedes essence? We mean that man first exists, encounters himself. Right? And I think we can think of this encounter with yourself as a kind of Cartesian experience of your own thinking. So man first exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world. Now this surging up in the world is, I think, maybe the most important, certainly I think the most interesting idea that we get in this Sartre essay. The idea being that human being is a kind of chaotic and free energy, a surging energy, an energy that moves, an energy that has power, is self-driven, self-directed, but is not heading toward a specific goal. Right? The significance of this word surging is that it is not, we human beings are not like an arrow shot at a target. We are like a fire hydrant that has been uncracked, right? We are like water surging, right? We surge in no particular direction, right? Another philosopher who I like, Alfonso Lingus, discusses this in terms of the human being is the using up, the expenditure of excess energies. Right? What is life? Life is expending excess energy. And this is true for, well, we'll leave Lingus behind, we'll stick with Sartre. This surging is our essence, but it is not essentialized. It is not defined. Right? We are this surging existence. We encounter ourselves as this surging existence with energy to expend, with powers to use, with desire. And after discovering ourselves to be this thing, only then do we define ourselves. Do we decide what we are. So our existence is this surging thing that is capable of encountering itself, of reflection. But where that surging will lead, how we will channel and use these surging powers that we are or have to give them direction, to decide in reflection what we are and what we care about and what we will do. All of that is done after the fact, after we exist. Now, maybe this sounds obvious, right? Maybe this seems right. like something that not a big deal. Right? Of course, we exist, and then we decide what we will be. Right? As human beings, we are constantly deciding what we're going to be. But what Sartre means here is something a little grander, which is this idea, existence precedes essence, is a kind of overturning or challenge to the traditional idea of truth, of the human being, of being in general, which argues that essence precedes existence. So, again, on page 3, he says, if man, as the existentialist sees him, is not definable, it is because to begin with, he is nothing. Right? So, at the beginning, we are nothing. He will not be anything until later, and then he will be what he makes of himself. Thus, there is no human nature, because there is no God to have a conception of it. Man simply is, not that he is simply what he conceives himself to be, but he is what he wills, and as he conceives himself after already existing, as he wills to be after that leap toward existence. So, the key idea here is we think that the human being, or Sartre's critiquing this idea, this traditional idea, that the human being has an essence prior to its existence, and that essence is given to the human being by God. And now, why do we think this? Because we think of the world as created. We think of nature as creation. We think, right, in religious thinking, in Christian theology, God creates the world. God creates human beings. And in creating those things, he gives them an essence. Right? In the same way that when a human being creates a tool or fabricates anything, it has an essence. Sartre gives the example of a knife, right? Paper knife. When I make a knife, I make it for a specific purpose, to cut things, right? And so I make the knife in a certain way, right? I make it sharp. I give it a certain length. I give it a handle so that it's easy to use. I give it all the things that it will need in order to fulfill its purpose, right? In order to do its job. Because the knife has a set, determined purpose, the essence of the knife is to achieve this purpose, right? To cut. So the knife has an essence, and that essence derives from the purpose that it serves. The knife cuts. Therefore, the essence of the knife is to be a thing that cuts, a cutting tool. And because the knife has an essence, has a purpose, we can then determine objectively if the knife is good or bad. Right? Does the knife cut? If so, then it's good. If not, then it's bad. How well does it cut? Is it easy to use? Right? Is it comfortable to use? All of the value judgments about the knife can be more or less objective, in the sense that a knife that doesn't cut, everyone would agree, is a bad knife. It doesn't serve its purpose. It is failing to be a knife It's not living up to its essence. It's not realizing or actualizing its essence. So for the knife, the essence precedes its existence. I conceive of the knife as an idea, right? The essence of the thing is roughly like the form of the thing in the sense of Platonic forms. Right? The ideal version of this. Right? The ideal knife cuts perfectly forever. So I have this essence in my head before I create the knife. And therefore, essence precedes existence. I have the idea, the essence, I bring it into existence. Now, this same model, the model of the knife, works for human beings if we believe that the world, that nature, that human beings are created by God. Right? God would have created human beings in the same way we create the knife. He has an idea of what the human being will be, what the human being will do or ought to do, and then creates the human being in order to fulfill that essence. And so in the Christian theological version, God conceives of the essence of human beings and then brings them into existence. So essence precedes existence. Now, in this worldview, human beings have, therefore, an absolute nature. There is human nature. Human nature is based in the essence of being human. What's more, because in this view, human beings do have this essential and objective essence, human beings also, therefore, have a purpose, right? Which is to live according to that essence, right? To actualize, to realize that essence, to be human in the correct way. Right? To have a purpose, to have an essence means to have some kind of purpose, at least to the extent that you will want to be a proper human, right? The purpose of being human is to, at the very least, be human. And if we have an essence, that means to live up to that essence, whether or not that is to be pious and follow the teachings of the Bible, whether or not that is to achieve happiness through contemplation, through thinking, through political action, as Aristotle thought. To say that we have an essence is to say that there's something there's some right way to be human, that there is an objective human nature, and we should all strive to stay in line with that nature. And what Sartre is saying is, at the beginning, there is no essence. At bottom, human beings have no essence. There is no such thing as human nature. Moreover, there is no purpose to being human. Right? What is a human for? Right? Is there a purpose to being human in the same way that a knife has a purpose? Sartre is going to say no. Right? There is no point to being human. Right? And very obviously, this bleeds into the topic that Camus is engaged with in the myth of Sisyphus, right? There is no point to being human. There's no purpose to being human. There is no point to life. There is no purpose in life. If there is no purpose, if there is no nature, then also there is no right or wrong way to be human. Right? Man simply is, Sartre says. Right? Whatever we are, whatever you are as an individual, that is your proper way of being. So to be without essence, without purpose, might, as Sartre says, and as Camus talks about in depth, right, might give us reason for despair. Right? But this being without nature, being without purpose, the idea that we simply are, right? And that there is nothing that we should be, is also, for Sartre and Camus, this is their point of connection, a very freeing realization. And if there's nothing I should be, if there is nothing, right, that I am objectively and absolutely and essentially meant to do, if I have no purpose, then I can be anything I want. Right? I can decide for myself what I'm going to be. So this is the sort of second part of this equation. Existence precedes essence. In the beginning, we are mere existence. But being the thinking things that we are, when we realize our freedom, when we realize that we are undetermined, without essence, we are then free to give ourselves an essence, to decide what our purpose is, what our essence is. And so, man simply is. Not that he is simply what he conceives himself to be, but he is what he wills, and as he conceives himself after already existing. So, not that he is simply what he conceives himself to be. I can't decide that I am a reindeer or a bird. Right? I can't decide that I'm a bird and then be able to fly. I can't change what I am. I can't change my factical existence, which is to say, I can't change the brute facts of my existence. And here, Sartre is, again, I think, making use of that Cartesian distinction between the realm of objectivity, of objective facts, and the realm of subjective ideas. I can't change the realm of objective facts, right? The thing that I am, I can't change. I can't change, right, my body. Can't change, right, the sort of capacity for rationality. I can't make myself right, all-knowing. I can't make myself fly. I can't change that about myself, which I can know through observation, scientific investigation. Scientific part of myself that is an object of scientific investigation, I can't change. But my purpose, my essence, that which gives me my personality, what gives me a sense of meaning, sense of truth in any other way but scientifically, that I am able to decide, right? I'm able to will myself to be whatever I like. Now that I know what I am, I can decide what I will do with this thing that I am, how I will use this being that I have, right? So this freedom is the essence of existentialism, right? Existentialism is about, or is the theory of human freedom, the human freedom to be whatever you are. Now let's just use an example here. I think this is the most obvious example, but it's a good example, right? And this is the example of homosexuality. If we say that there's an essence to being human, we might say the essence of being human is to procreate. Right? The purpose of being human is to procreate. Right? The only point to life is to reproduce. And then we might say, well, someone who is homosexual is not going to reproduce, right? Homosexual sex doesn't lead to pregnancy and procreation, and therefore homosexuality or homosexuals are failing to achieve the essence of being human. They're failing to fulfill the purpose of being human, right? If you're gay, you can't reproduce, or you in a same-sex relationship, you're not going to procreate, and therefore, right, you are failing the purpose of being human. And Sartre is going to say, right, forget that purpose. Right? Don't let anyone tell you that what you are, what you desire, what you value, right? The things that you pursue, what you will and wish, don't let anyone tell you that is bad because it's not living up to the purpose of being human, or it is a deviation from the essence of being human, right? This whole idea of deviance is about some conception of the essence of being human. Sometimes we substitute the idea of norms for the idea of essence. Now, what is normal, which is a sort of probabilistic rather than essentialist way of thinking about it. Anyway, right. So, from an existentialist point of view, right, there is nothing wrong with being gay. Right? If you find that you desire that, right? If you value what you value is love from the same sex, if you are attracted to the same gender, same sex, same gender. Those values are just as good as any other value. Right? Because how will you measure those values? There is nothing that you can use to measure one value against another, except with recourse to some idea of essence, to say, well, my values are going to align me more with true human nature, right? And therefore they're better. Whereas your values aren't going to allow you to achieve this idea of essence that I have. Right? So this idea that man simply is, human beings are what they are, and then they will themselves to be something based on that, right, is I think we can see that attitude in the sort of gay rights movement and the movement to, normalize homosexuality, which is to say, I am what I am. Right? If I'm homosexual, I am what I am, and I can't change what I am. There is nothing wrong with being what you are. Right? And anyone who says you shouldn't be what you are is imposing some idea of essence onto you, some idea of purpose. Right? Why shouldn't I be this? Because it doesn't help to achieve whatever you think your purpose is, or whatever you think the purpose of being human is. So it allows for a lot of freedom in what an individual is allowed to be, what we think a human being can be, what human nature is. Right? You might say, right, and this is the language that, if it's not anymore, used to be used all the time. Right? Homosexuality is unnatural. Heterosexuality is natural. Right? And therefore we say what is natural is what is essential. It's a very theological conception. And Sartre is saying, no, right? That's to say that nature is the same as an essence, but nature is simply existence, right? The homosexual is just as natural as the heterosexual. Both occur in nature, right? Both exist, and you have to begin with existence. Then you decide, right, what you will be. So an interesting consequence of this is this idea that there is no human nature, that we are not a fixed being. Not only is there nothing that we should be, not only do we not have a purpose, but there is nothing that we are. Human beings, in an important way, are nothing. There is no such thing as a human being. If by human being we mean something that has an essence or a definition. Right? I think we can think about this scientifically, and Sartre is likely thinking about this in the context of evolution, right? And to take into account these scientific theories is fitting for a Cartesian project. We evolved from various other hominids, right? Apes, other great apes. We are a great ape among other great apes. We evolved from a different species, and presumably we continue to evolve into another species. Through evolution, our very genetic makeup is in a state of constant change, right? Mutation. So not only are we in a state of constant transformation in terms of our social worlds, right? The social forms in which we live, what we, historical development, historical progress, right? Not only are we, are our bodies aging, right, at the individual level, our bodies are growing and shrinking and aging and changing, but also at a cellular level, at our most foundational level, we're also mutating and transforming. Right? Nothing about us is static. Nothing about us is fixed. From the smallest genetic component of our being to the most ephemeral and passing physical appearance of our being. We are in a state of perpetual flux and change. There is nothing but flux. To the extent that we are anything fixed, to the extent that we are anything stable, that stability comes not from existence, which is nothing but change and flux. To the extent that we are anything stable, anything definite, anything determined, that determination and definition comes from ourselves, right? Comes from our own thinking, our own decisions, our own will. From out of this constant flux, we will ourselves to be something. We decide what our purpose will be. We decide how, we might say, to interpret ourselves. Now, this freedom is a kind of danger also. In the following way, right? Or rather, in the way that the Catholics are worried about, right? That if there is no inherent objective way to judge a human being as either better or worse, good or bad, because there is no purpose, there is no essence with which to compare an individual human being, to say you're falling short of what you should be, then how can one ever say you shouldn't do X, Y, and Z? You shouldn't be immoral. You shouldn't steal. You shouldn't lie. You shouldn't kill. What's to prevent us from becoming completely immoral and unethical, from becoming evil? Right? Isn't this an invitation to evil? This is one of the Catholic critiques. And so Sartre wants to say, he wants to argue, and does argue, that the absence of an essence is not an invitation for immorality. The absence of God, and to say that there is no God, is not an invitation for immorality. Right? So this is on page 5. He mentions a famous quote from Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky once wrote, "If God did not exist, everything would be permitted." And that, for existentialism, is the starting point. Right? God does not exist, and everything is permitted. Right? Everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist, and man is, in consequence, forlorn, for he cannot find anything to depend upon, either within or without himself, or outside himself. He discovers forthwith that he is without excuse. For if indeed existence precedes essence, one will never be able to explain one's action by reference to a given and specific human nature. In other words, there is no determinism. Man is free. Man is freedom. Right? Everything is indeed permitted. There is no determinism. Right? I can will myself to be whatever I want. I am freedom itself. Now, this is an interesting idea. I think the thought that man is freedom, not that man has freedom, but man is freedom. And I think this is what one way to interpret this is to say, well, again, human being is free by virtue of being an agent of nature, by being one of the surging forces that belongs to nature itself. Right? Nature is free. Right? Being, existence is free. It's free to exist. Right? It does what it wants, in the sense that I think we can think of evolution. It develops freely, without any goal. Right? Evolution occurs through random mutation. There is no plan. There's no objective. Nature simply produces, freely produces. What it produces is not determined by any goal, and it can't be measured by any goal. Nature is freely producing, and we, as one of these freely produced surging powers of nature that is surging through its own changes. In that sense, we are freedom. We are an example of the freedom of being itself, an example of the freedom of nature itself. Now, the other important point here, I think, in this quote on page 5, that begins with the Dostoevsky quote, is that there are two experiences that attend to the realization of our freedom. The first is that we become forlorn. We become depressed. We become anxious. We fall into anguish or despair. Freedom makes us despair. And in our freedom, we realize that we are without excuse. That we are responsible for ourselves. Now let's start with this second point to tie it back to this original idea, right? Everything is permitted. There is no morality. Existentialism, this kind of freedom, is an invitation to immorality. Where's our morality going to come from if we don't have God to tell us what to do? If we don't have an idea of essence to direct our action? How can we have any sense of morality? And for Sartre, this idea of morality is going to come from our inherent sense of responsibility. Freedom comes with responsibility. To realize that you are free is at the same time to realize that you are responsible for yourself. Right? That whatever you become, whatever you do, can't be blamed on anyone or anything but yourself. So what is responsibility? What is this sense of responsibility? Sartre talks about it in terms of conscience. I am responsible to myself in the first place, right? I'm responsible to myself in the sense that I don't want to do anything that will give me a bad conscience. Now, why not? Why don't I want to have a bad conscience? And what is this being responsible to myself? How will that make me moral? In the first place, it is going to be that my responsibility to myself has to do with not suffering a bad conscience. Right? I do have a conscience. It is part of my being, and it tells me what I want to do. What I want to do, not what my essence dictates for myself, not what God intends for me, but what I value, what I care about. My conscience is an individual experience. So when I do something that gives me a bad conscience, I'm not being responsible to myself because I'm denying what I truly want, right? What I tell myself in my heart that I want. So to follow your conscience is to be responsible to yourself. The other way that this responsibility is about my relation to myself is that if I do something that is painful for other people, right? If I do something immoral, if I steal from someone else, right? Then when I see that action has hurt someone else, I see that action, that theft, is not good in the way that I thought it was. I see the inconsistency of that action. And in particular, I will evaluate or judge, I will judge an action that hurts someone to be immoral when the same action is done to me, right? I realize the golden rule, right? To do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The golden rule here is about the logical consistency of my own values. If I say I want to be a thief, I want to steal. Stealing is good. I value stealing. And then somebody steals from me. I see a logical contradiction, inconsistency in my valuing of theft. And I see that theft is not the good that I thought it was. This is not to say that stealing is objectively bad. It's to say that in realizing that something like theft is not going to, cannot be structurally embraced by all people, right? Because there's always a victim in theft. So it can never be universally embraced. I see that in valuing that, in deciding that I want to be a thief, that what I am, what I value, is never going to be approved of by other people. And that concerns me because I want to believe that I represent an example for all people. In a kind of egoistic way, I want to believe that my values could at least be the values of everyone. What I enjoy, I want other people to enjoy. What I value, I want other people to value. And when other people don't enjoy what I enjoy, or don't value what I value, it makes me question what I value. So I have a responsibility in my action that is still about myself, in that I want the things that I value to be valuable to other people. That's one of the things that I inherently desire, Sartre seems to think. And so when someone doesn't enjoy what I enjoy, for example, my thieving, then I get less pleasure from the thieving. And so Sartre goes on to say, I am responsible for myself as an individual, but I also have to think of myself as acting on behalf of all mankind, of all people. Not just what do I want to do, but what do I think everyone should want to do? And this is a very Kantian thought. Anyway, we don't have to get into that. But the idea, I think, is I should only value and rejoice in those things that I can imagine all people would be able to rejoice in, to take pleasure in. Right? That sort of the existential dream is to present yourself and your values as a model that everyone else can learn from, right? That everyone else would partake in the things that you value. But then there's another reason to be responsible also, and that is that I am responsible to other people. Other people are going to have an impact on my happiness. They are going to be able to make me feel good or bad. Right? So if I do something immoral, something that hurts someone else or other people, I will have to respond for that action. Other people will make me responsible. So the first part of this is, why should you be responsible for yourself? And that is because you don't want to have a bad conscience, and because doing things that are good for other people, not just for yourself, will increase the pleasure that you take in the things that you do. But the second part comes from the fact that I am indeed part of a society. Solitary as I might be, despite the fact that I'm able to remove myself and enter into the solitude and think and be remote and in my own mind, I'm also a being that exists in the world. Right? I exist in a society, in a collective. Action is inherently communal. What I do is always going to affect other people, have an impact on other people. It is impossible to escape other people. One of Sartre's most famous lines comes from a play he wrote called No Exit, which ends with the conclusion, hell is other people. Hell is other people because everything I do is going to then come back to me refracted through other people. I'm always going to have to respond to other people on behalf of myself, on behalf of my actions. If I do something, that action is going to be judged by others, and I will have to defend that action or explain that action, or I'm going to have to suffer the judgment of other people because of that action. So Sartre is not suggesting, right, now this hell is other people. This is not the right way to think about other people for Sartre, right? This is sort of one of the pitfalls, one of the ways existentialism can go wrong, is to believe that hell is other people. I mean, at a sort of strictly metaphysical level, at the level of, right, I am pure freedom and nothing else. then anything that gets in the way of the exercise of that freedom is a constraint, is a kind of a hellish regulation and prohibition. The correct way to be an existentialist is to attempt to act in a way that other people will celebrate. To be responsible means to only will yourself to be a thing that other people will either enjoy or which you will be able to, in good conscience, defend to other people. So this freedom, then, is responsibility. It is being left without excuse, as Sartre says, right? I can't blame myself on anyone but myself. He says, again on page 5, we are left alone without excuse. That is what I mean when I say that man is condemned to be free. Condemned because he did not create himself, yet is nevertheless at liberty. And from the moment he is thrown into this world, he is responsible for everything he does. And this is, I think, also what Camus is talking about when he's talking about the absurd. Right? I didn't decide what I was going to be. I didn't decide the kind of being that I would be. And yet I am responsible for being this thing that I am. Right? And this is a kind of condemnation. Right? This freedom is condemnation. Man is condemned to be free because freedom is a weight. Right? Freedom is an obligation. It's a duty. Our freedom is a problem. I have to be free, which means I have to be responsible for myself. I have to think about what I'll do with myself. I have to think about what I should be, what I think I should be. What do I think I should be? So I'm condemned to be free because I'm condemned to be responsible for myself. And this responsibility for myself is never ending. Right? At no point can I say, all right, someone else is responsible for me now. And this sense of being condemned is also the experience of freedom as a kind of affliction. Right? Say freedom is a condemnation. Say that freedom is a kind of problem. This problem, freedom as a problem, is also what leads me to despair. Right? Despair, anguish, anxiety, these themes of existentialism that we see, not just in Sartre, but which are the essential idea of Camus' essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. Right? Freedom produces anxiety, freedom produces anguish, because there is no way for me to decide, no way for me to know what I should do. This is the absurdity that Camus is getting at again. I must decide what I'm going to do, what I will be. And I know that whatever I decide to be, I will be responsible for. But I can't know, and there's no way for me to learn what the right thing for me to be is. I have to know, I have to decide what to be before I know whether or not the thing that I'm deciding to be is the right choice. In other words, you can never know if what you're doing is right or not if what you're doing will have good or bad consequences. And yet you still have to take responsibility for your action, for your decision. So let's just think about this. I've got to wrap up in a minute, but let's think about this example that Sartre gives, right? There's a young man, and he's trying to decide. He's trying to make a decision about what he will be, what he is going to do with himself. Either he's going to go join the resistance against the Nazis, go join the Free French Forces in England to fight the Nazis. He's going to join the war, or he's going to stay home and take care of his ailing mother. Both of these decisions are good, right? Neither one of them is bad or immoral. Fighting Nazis, taking care of your mother. Which one is right? How can I ever make that kind of decision? How can I know which one is more responsible? If I go and fight the war, right, perhaps my mother dies alone and is unhappy. If I decide to take care of my mother, perhaps, right, the war is lost to the Nazis and I lose the French Republic, or I lose my principles. So whichever decision I make, I have to take responsibility for what could be a disastrous consequence. Either the loss of my principles, even potentially feeling like I'm responsible in some small way for the loss of the war, or feeling like I failed my mother, right? I let down I failed to meet my responsibility for my mother. How could you ever make that kind of decision? Sartre's point is, there is no way. There is no correct decision in that case. And anyone who tells you that there are some criteria which you can use to make that kind of decision is using an idea of essence, or an idea of what the human being should always do, what the purpose of being human is. Sartre's point here is taking care of your mother, fighting fascism. These could both be considered essential purposes of being human. Whichever one you choose will determine what you are, what you value, who you are, how you think of yourself for the rest of your life. You are making yourself who you are in that decision. And in deciding what you will be, no one can help you, right? Because everyone is different. Everyone will make that decision in a different way based on different things. Right? Sartre says maybe that decision will be caused by some seemingly trivial or inconsequential decision that you made 10 years ago, right? That there's no way to know how or what goes into that decision. You have to make a kind of blind leap and say, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a decision. I have to make the decision. And then, even though you don't know whether or not the decision you made is right, you can't judge or measure whether or not it's right. You will have to be responsible for it. Right? That whatever comes as a result of your decision, you will then have to take on as your responsibility. So we determine ourselves without knowing what that determination will precisely make us. We decide what we will be without knowing what it means to be that thing that we will be. And then we're responsible for being that thing. And that is sort of the dynamic between freedom and responsibility. I want to make one more point here, which is the next example that Sartre gives, which I think is an interesting one. He describes a person who fails their entire life. right? Fails to make any money, fails to fall in love, fails to even become a soldier, right? And having gone through all these failures, what does this person do? He decides that all of these failures have just been a sign that he is meant to become a monk. Now, Sartre is an atheist. He doesn't necessarily think that becoming a monk is a good thing, right? He wouldn't choose that for himself. But he says, right, how could you ever say that interpreting all these failures as a sign that you should become a monk is wrong? These failures mean nothing in themselves. They have no objective meaning. Right? If you decide that they are a sign that you are meant to become a monk, that's actually a very good use of this existentialist idea. Rather than despair and say, I can't be anything, right? Rather than despair and say, well, I failed at everything. I'm not what I should be. To say, now I see what I think I should be. Right? I've been given a sign as to what I am. I think the sort of moral of this story is that you're always able to value the situation that you've been thrown into, right? To make the best of whatever circumstance you find yourself in. It's always possible in existentialism to say, I approve of what I am, right? Because I am responsible for it. I am the person that has decided through a series of decisions, has landed in this place. And my willingness to enjoy my circumstances is the same as my willingness to enjoy myself. To approve of my circumstances is to approve of myself. To approve of myself is to approve of my circumstances. And for Sartre, you should always approve of yourself, right? You have to embrace the thing that you are, even if that is by most normal measures a failure, and say, all right, that means I'm meant for something else, and that is a good thing. I'm grateful for these failures because they've shown me what I am. So this is the kind of double-edged sword of freedom also. And Camus gets into this in more detail, right? That we are fated to be a certain kind of thing. In some sense, I don't decide what I'm going to be. I can't decide if I'm going to be a soldier or a son. There is no way for me to decide. Yet I still do decide. And what I decide, you could say, is decided by chance or decided by fate. Right? Whatever in me makes that decision is the kind of brute fact of my existence. And this sort of fatedness by which we make decisions is our freedom, in the sense that what freedom is the freedom to be ourselves, the freedom to embrace what we are, to be happy to be what we are. Now, we have to take into account other people and our responsibility, and we should will to do that which we can respond to other people about, which we can defend. But the more central point is that if you make a decision that is meant to live up to some goal or to please anyone but yourself, then you're not really being free. That to be free is to give yourself over to this sort of random surging that is life. Yeah. All right, so I think we can sort of see, and maybe we'll talk about this in our discussion, that this is a kind of popular version of Nietzsche, of Heidegger, that is about sort of social freedom, about erasing norms and making space for individual difference, individual values. Right? Whatever you are attracted to, whatever you want, pursue that. Whoever you are, whatever you feel, right? Let yourself be that thing. Direct your values, yourself, this inner surging of energies that is you. Direct that toward actions that you can be responsible for, that aren't going to hurt other people. But don't try to be anyone but yourself. Allow yourself to value the things that you sort of inherently value. All right, so let's stop there with Sartre. I would say more about Camus, but we're out of time. We'll do a separate video on that Camus. All right, until next time. Goodbye.